Bem, como de hábito, a gente recolhe 2, 3 perguntas e volta à mesa. Quem é que se voluntaria? Isso. Três pessoas aqui. Eu peço que as pessoas se identifiquem e façam perguntas concisas.
Ok. Meu nome é Armando Henriques e eu tenho 2 perguntas. Uma para o professor Rob Atkinson about the geographic distribution or the impact of this new technology or this technology change in the geographic distribution of the workers. When I think about previous technological changes, what we saw in the steam power, for instance, is the concentration of workers around the factories that end up leading to these big cities that we live today. How do you see this changing with this new change that is coming and could allow for a spread of this? And the second question for Professor Manuel Treitenberg is about the... Manuel, okay, thank you. Is about your statement that the combination of these technological change, losers and winners, with the political divide is dangerous. My question is not this division between losers and winners that caused this political divide? When I look at what happens in the US to stay there in the elections and so on, it seems to me that a portion of what we see today in all this confrontation and conflict comes from these losers and winners anyway. So this would cause the political divide. That's the question.
Armando, aqui... Aí chega lá, peraí, vamos com calma aqui. Armando, eu preciso de um microfone aqui.
Armando Uric, da Internews. Well, just a very simple question with a bias on economy. Wouldn't it be to be expected a greater impact of all the innovations that we have already had on labor productivity? And why that hasn't happened? Why the economies have not become more dynamic?
Here in Brazil.
Well, basically in the United States and Europe.
Tiago, depois Tiago e Roberto. Vamos.
Alô? Oi. Tiago Laffer, human being. So, not a machine.
Yeah, you look like one.
Not a machine, not singularity here. Okay. So I guess my first question is to Mr. Atkinson, which is taking the Otis elevator example. What are the constraints for technology adoption? Because in the graph it shows clearly that it took ages to diminish the jobs of the old technology and the new technology. And I guess the second question I have is to Manuel. And I think, to me, it's intuitive that if you have higher productivity, you're going to suffer less the effects of disruptive technologies. And when you have lower productivity, you're going to suffer more the effects. So taking your last comment, for developing countries, wouldn't it be more, it's an opportunity, sure, but the impacts sounds like they're going to be bigger, stronger.
Roberto, one
Good
more.
afternoon. My name is Robert Wong. Dr. Atkinson, I thought your presentation was very interesting, and I do believe that artificial intelligence will replace a lot of human jobs. For example, if a mafia boss wants to eliminate an opponent, he'll used to get a professional assassin and get the job done. Now he doesn't have to. Gets a drone and gets it done also without the human element. But what I want to say is the following. Robots will certainly do better, faster, cheaper than a human being can in many aspects of work. But I think a robot is incapable of one human element, which is empathy. And so I think jobs that need empathy, like caretakers, nurses, and therapists, and all that. What do you think of that? I mean, is that valid? Thank you.
Okay, back to you now. Robert, you start and then...
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, it is such a delight to be on a panel with Manuel, just because there's so few people who agree with me. It's just, how else can I say it? Even my wife doesn't agree with me. So the first question on spatial, actually, quick thing. I can't do a presentation now because I'm within 6 months of my new book coming out without hawking my new book. New book's coming out from MIT Press in March called Small and Big is Beautiful, Confronting the Mythology of Small Business. Turns out Walmart actually pays 20% higher wages than the average retailer in the U.S., than small retailers. So I agree that Walmart is Fordist-sized its production, but it did get productivity out of that. Now the next big thing is, could the Amazon worker be using virtual reality or AI or things like that to go to the next level? Spatial implications. Given that my degree is in city and regional planning, you'd think I would think about that. And I actually have thought about that. I wrote a report for the U.S. Congressional Office of Technology Assessment 25 years ago on that question. So there's two answers, two parts of that. One is geographical. And I think actually, and I haven't seen any good work on this, but I do think it's a risk to a country like Brazil. The past technology essentially allowed commoditization and sort of decentralization to lower wage countries. I think the new technology is going to take some of those advantages away from developing countries and allow some level of re-centralization, because you're going to have higher productivity, you're going to have higher customization. So I think it's an important question for a country like Brazil, which is sort of caught in the middle. It's not low, it's not high. How is the global system going to play out? And then you have the spatial implications within a country. And I think the answer is we don't know, and partly it depends on at what level does the technology sort of automate or replace sort of urbanized knowledge kinds of jobs, which tend to have agglomeration economies because you have to be close to each other. If you could, for example, just get, a third of the lawyer jobs, because now AI is doing some legal work, that might have an impact. The second thing would be, certainly with some of these technologies, space becomes less important, so you can imagine maybe smaller cities. I don't see us going to kind of a Mumford-like world Lewis Mumford-like world where we're all living in little villages of 10,000 people, but it's possible you could see a more even urban hierarchy with these new technologies. Second, why isn't there a greater impact of existing technology in the U.S.? And Manuel and I probably agree with this. And my look at it is we're actually at I have another slide for tomorrow, which, by the way, is a good commercial. I'm speaking at the AmCham tomorrow at 3 p.m., so if you cannot get enough of this, go to their website and you can register. But on that one, I have a slide where I talk about long waves, and I think actually we're at the top of the S-curve in the current long wave. Does anybody really care that the iPhone 10 came out, or 9, or nobody cares? It's marginally better than the 8. But the first iPhone was radically different. Same thing with, when you get a laptop. I'd have to get a laptop every 2 years because the thing just got so much better. Same thing with broadband. And I think these things are slowing down, and they're just so in the country like the U.S. or a region like Europe, most businesses have already adopted most of the stuff, and what they're adopting now is incremental. So cloud computing is this really great thing, but it's incremental. It's not a fundamental revolution, as I think AI as a GPT would be a fundamental revolution. And then sorry to go through the constraints of adoption. There's an interesting study by OECD that came out last year looking at productivity around the world. And one of the things that this study found was that if you look at the growth, this is why Robert Gordon, I think, is wrong. If you look at the growth of productivity of the leading 10% of the firms in any industry globally, so the best of the best, it's just consistently grown 3 to 4% a year. The other 90% grew until the mid to early 2000s and then have grown very slowly. So there's this bifurcation between the best and the average. Now, why is that? And nobody knows, but I think the best theory is that there's something about this technology system which requires complementarity of assets, and it's not just I'm a manager, I'm going to throw in a machine tool. No, I'm a manager, I'm going to put in an IT system, but I have to make it compatible with my customers and my suppliers. I have to get everybody, I have to retrain people, I have to rethink how I run my organization. So I think one constraint is that. I think the second constraint of the Otis elevator operators, most organizations are not first adopters. They're late, partly they're lazy, but more rationally they're risk averse. So they want to see other people try these things before they try and fail. So you have late adopters, early adopters. These things take time. Secondly, writing off existing assets. So you just might have bought something 5 years ago. You don't want to just throw it away. And lastly, a lot of these technologies exhibit what you could call system interdependencies. And so a good example of that would be the smart meter. So we're very slow in the world adopting smart meter technology. One of the reasons is because our appliances aren't smart. So if you had smart appliances that could turn on at 9 o'clock at night when the electric bill goes down, you'd be more likely to get a smart meter, but you don't have a smart meter because you don't have a smart appliance, and vice versa. So you have these chicken or egg issues. Same thing with healthcare. You don't have electronic patient records because the doctors don't have it, the patients don't have it. So that's an issue. Lastly, the question about empathy. I agree with that, that certainly jobs that have a human touch, and I think you talked about that, Manuel, certainly will grow for no other reason than it's hard to automate sort of human touch jobs, so they're just going to get what William Baumol called Baumel's disease jobs. They're just going to become a bigger share of the economy. But we shouldn't forget, you mentioned CS skills being, if you're 30, my son's 25 and he's going to get a CS degree in 1.5 years, so I think he's got 3 years of earnings potential before he gets, before all my tuition payments have gone to naught up in the air. But I actually don't believe that because, sure, programming may go away, but there are going to be this whole other kinds of things that you could use and will need in computer science, and I think many occupations like that.
All right. First of all, good questions. The losers and winners, where they cause the political divide. Well, you know, we economists are very careful when we talk about causation because it's very tricky. And you know, one of the differences between machine learning and everything else is that in the realm of machine learning, there is not such a thing as causation. They don't care about. They care only about prediction. And because they can handle enormous quantities of data and, you know, identify even, you know, factors that may influence the prediction that are tiny, and we will call them insignificant, okay, then they don't care about causation. So we live in a world that causation is, but I'm not trying to avoid the question. You know, for a given a split between losers and winners, okay, the political outcome of that can be very, very different. And we see that in different countries. It can go left, it can go right, it can go to populism, it can go to fascism and so forth. So there is no clear, you know, kind of a one-to-one from a particular distribution of gains and losses and losers and winners and losers in the population to a particular political divide. And oftentimes it's idiosyncratic to a person, okay? It's idiosyncratic to a particular geographic distribution in the US. You know, the geographic distribution of losers is very, very, you know, the Appalachians and so forth, it's very clear. It's not the only one, but it's, you know, and that may impact in turn the political. So we should be very careful with that. The point is that when they are correlated, and these correlations, whatever the causation is, that's very, very dangerous and could be explosive. I want to add on the question on the productivity that we don't, you know, there's this famous saying by Bob Solow, the Nobel Prize in Economics, that we see, you know, technological change everywhere except for the economic statistics. Now, he said that many, many years ago. It's still true. And I want to add to what you said, Bob, that there is an increasing and almost unbearable discrepancy between what's happening in reality and our ability and our methods to measure it. I mean, you know, there are endless examples, okay? take this, okay, the Google, okay, the use of search engines. Where is that reflected? The benefits for us and the productivity gains from the fact that we can do endless number of things from home that will save us time and trouble and, you know, whatever, traffic jams in Sao Paulo, okay? We can do it at home. How, if at all, is that reflected in the productivity measures? It's not, for the most part. There are certain things that are reflected. For the most part, it's not reflected, and in many cases there are perverse, actually, results that it may result in a reduction even in productivity as measured. As technological change and innovation affects more and more services, which is by far the largest component of the economy, okay, then the discrepancy between our ability to measure and what's happening is growing greater. I always remind people that the basic framework for productivity measure was developed essentially by Cobb Douglas, you know, these two guys that developed the function, which we in the economics call Cobb Douglas, which is a particular mathematical function, that the residual, the productivity, is embedded in that equation. That was developed at the time when agriculture was still very important, and it was thought of in that context. It was then very successfully applied to manufacturing, okay? And then in the service economy, it has become an anomaly, okay? So there is also the S curve, you know, I'm positive about that. But Solow said that, you know, 30 or something like that years ago, when we were not at the end of the S-shape curve. So already then, you know, this discrepancy was happening. One thing about the Otis elevator and operators, you said that they disappeared in the 1980s completely, right?
There were still a few, and the last ones were in the U.S. Congress.
And
Seriously.
And in a particular hotel in Washington, D.C., that you may have known, that they kept him, like, you know, I don't know why. I mean, like, he was cute or something like that, and it drove me completely crazy because the other elevator was at some point broken, and you had to call this guy to bring the elevator. I mean, it was very annoying, but in any case, that's it. The thing about the possibility that the sort of the bad impact of innovation may be stronger in less developed countries. It could be. But if, you know, you look at the Asian tigers, if you look at the countries that nowadays are growing very, very fast, all of them are less developed countries, okay, that are already achieving a higher rate. Yes, because there is more to catch up and so forth, and it's easy to grow, you know, 100% when you go from 1 to 2, but it's much more difficult to grow fast when you are 1 million, okay, whatever. That's true. I mean, part is an artifact, okay? But what I'm suggesting is, I mean, you know, the classic example is the use of this thing in Africa. Africa as a continent, except for a few countries, essentially leapfrog and obviated the need to have land-based phones and so forth, okay? So all that copper was rendered unnecessary, and it, you know, the use of, the widespread use of cell phones in Africa is allowing for transactions that were unthinkable in the past, you know, in remote villages and so forth and so on. So the potential for a very positive impact, I think it's much larger in the potential for that. Whether it will materialize or not, okay, you know, that's a long stretch and it depends on policies and so forth. A last comment on empathy and robots. I was 10 days ago, something like that, in a conference, an amazing conference actually, on AI and the economy in Toronto, organized by the NBR, the Sloan Foundation, Toronto University, and so forth. And among others in the audience, but not the audience, he also presented, was the Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize in economics. He's a psychologist and so forth. And he was asked this question. And he said, empathy? No problem. Empathy is a series of, expressions and traits and so forth that can be easily analyzed and replicated, and so forget it. Empathy? No problem. What can I say? I hope that, I told him, he was sitting next to me, I told him, you may be right, I damn hope that you're wrong.
All right, thank you. No, still if would you allow me to go for last round of questions?
Well, he said that he's human. Still.
So now,
One quick
it's
question.
quick question.
Two others here.
It's about the African example. If you think that they are more prone to taking the technological risks than, let's say, Israel or the States, in that sense. Like, I'm going to use
Okay, let me say,
like
yeah.
cryptocurrencies
So
or something like that. Bitcoin.
Let me collect other two questions.
Fair
and
enough.
then you answer them all.
Okay, not my question, but my apartment building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan has elevator operators, just to say. Okay.
Are we invited or not?
Sure. I learned a lot, and both of the presentations were very interesting, but what was missing for me was any kind of gender analysis of all of what you discussed, and especially when you say that the little children and at the end the personal caregivers who are very often for end of life situations are women almost all of the time and very low paid almost all of the time. And there was no discussion of gender whatsoever. I forgot to say I'm Rochelle Seidel, Remember the Women Institute, New York. Okay, thank you.
At Plonsky University of São Paulo, a sizable part of our students don't dream to fight for a job, but they dream to create occupations, opportunities, entrepreneurship, innovative entrepreneurship. So I wonder if the title could have changed in disruptive innovation and the future of occupation and instead of employment, because employment is a particular type of occupation from the industrial era and maybe not so much for the future. Okay. And in this particular aspect, maybe Manuel can tell us something about the Startup Nation and what are the consequences in inequality, whatever you said, for a country where entrepreneurship is so high.
All right. That's it. If I'm not,
Can I start?
Who takes
Can I start?
the gender question?
Well, can I start actually with because I want to link two questions?
Okay, let's.
Yeah, I mean, you ask about the risks, okay, in adopting, and you ask about entrepreneurs. I want to actually link the two. First of all, traditionally, the biggest force retarding the adoption of innovation typically is not risk aversion, but vested interests by those that have a lot to lose from the adoption of innovation, okay? And those try to fight back, particularly when there are monopolies, etc., okay? Entrepreneurship is by definition disruptive, okay? Entrepreneurs are by definition risk-taking, okay? That's what they do, and that's what's required, okay, for innovation. So if you want to encourage the spread of innovation, you have to fight monopolies, because monopolies tend to preserve the monopoly position, and that's their main interest, and not to give way to innovation, okay? So that's kind of that. Gender, a couple of comments on that. We live in a world that I think that when we will look back years ahead on the last decades of the 20th century and certainly the time we live in. I think that one of the most fundamental changes is the drive towards erasing the gaps between men and women, between the gender. In every realm of life, we are still in the process. But this is perhaps one of the most important developments ever in humanity. Because essentially, the fact that women were relegated to a secondary standing in every realm of life, and even worse of that, okay, means, among other things, aside from the moral and normative and aspect, means that essentially you are doing away with half of your potential as humanity, okay? And we live, and I said that this morning, we live in an era that the most important factor is what we have here, okay, our capabilities. And we need to let each individual fulfill his or her potential, regardless of any demographics or gender or ethnicity or religion or whatever. This is the big challenge that lies ahead of us. Now, is the technology favoring this or that gender? I don't believe so. I believe that the technology of the AI and ML class, okay, is truly gender neutral, and in that sense, it may promote, advancing along the path that was started in that direction.
So I think that the gender question is a very good one. I have not seen anybody do an analysis of occupational predictions around technology by gender. Having said that, in the last 30 or 40 years or so, let me preface that by saying also, women in the U.S. tend to be in lower wage occupations as a group on average, and they tend to make less money on average than men, even in the same occupation. However, in the last 30 years approximately, women's wages have gone up 70%, men's wages have not gone up at all. So a lot of the wage stagnation in the U.S. is really a male story. And part of that is this point about trying to get back to some parity, which we didn't have before. Gender's a loaded question. If you believe that there are some inherent differences between men and women, and the guy at Google who got fired believed that, and I'm not advocating what he said, but given the fact that I have a daughter and a son, I think there are some differences inherently between men and women. I do think that the last 30 or 40 years of occupational change have tended to favor women. And I think on the future, we probably will go in that direction more. Because I do think a lot of the, men are, again, broad generalization, but, men can sit in front of a computer and just, they don't have to be interacting as much. And a lot of those jobs are the jobs that a machine can do quite well. The harder jobs for machines are more complex, that engage more personal interaction. And so I think women may have an advantage there. I just want to quickly respond to this employment versus jobs question, because it's something we deal with a lot in this new book, Big is Beautiful. One of the single biggest predictors you can have of if the country is rich or poor is the share of self-employment. The higher the share of self-employment, the poorer a country is. The U.S. has a very low share of self-employment, and it's one of the richest countries in the world. At the same time, the U.S. share of self-employment is the lowest it's been in U.S. history. So even with Uber and all of this stuff, there just aren't that many people. So I don't think that's going to change. I actually think that more people will continue to work for organizations, but I do think there are going to be a lot of opportunities for people to come up, particularly when you get a new technology system, a new GPT. It creates this enormous set of opportunities for somebody to figure out something to do with it. Bill Gates figured out something to do with that, Elon Musk, all these people. So I do think there's an enormous set of entrepreneurial opportunities that are going to emerge, and the real question is, do you have the people who are able to take advantage of that in this next wave? In a lot of ways, it's interesting. I look at Europe, and I see them just fighting the last war. How can we get search engines in Europe? You can't, okay? That's a technology, the same thing with social networks. That's done. The U.S. won. The real question is, what about this next wave? That's not done. The U.S. is not necessarily going to win that. Brazil could win part of it. Europe could win part of it. So I do think that's really where the entrepreneurship has to play a key role. I can't resist this monopoly thing because we have a whole 2 chapters in the book. I don't think it's just I don't think you can break it down as monopoly versus non-monopoly. I think it's more, political power to resist. I mean, some of the biggest resistors in the U.S. don't have monopoly. They're car dealers, for example, real estate agents, lawyers resist innovation, particularly in IT. They don't really have monopoly, but they have political power. Some of the biggest companies are the biggest drivers of innovation. I mean, look at Google with robots, and Facebook's doing the drones in Africa. So I agree that it's resistance to innovation. Sometimes that's about economic power. Sometimes it's much more about political power.
So, it was really wonderful. Thank you so much. Very interesting presentations and dialogue between you two. It was really a privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.